It's going to be one of those streams, boys. It's going to be one of those streams. Okay. I just want to start with, you can take a lot of the arguments that are being presented here and you can replace it with just about anything you use. This could include HTMX, for example. Like, just, it could be Svelte, it could be Vue, it could be Zig, it could be like anything, right? So think about it from the argument, from the principled argument standpoints. React is, in my opinion, the worst offender of these arguments. And so it's an easy one to pick on, even though, it has its place and it has things that are positive about it. But when you look at what it does and the consequences of what it does, it's a very easy one to pick on and extract the negative outcomes of it, right? And that might be a bit unfair to React, but unfortunately it's the truth, and life isn't always fair. So I don't really care for that argument. I'm just going to be as honest as I can be. Any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. It's no secret that web development has been problematic for a long time. Year after year, more tools are created with the pretense of being the ultimate solution to fix all web crapware once and for all. But are they accomplishing anything? I wonder if I have, I don't think I have dark mode here. Okay, doesn't matter. So in 1990, HTML was invented. In 1994, CSS was invented to fix HTML. In 1995, JS was invented to fix HTML and CSS. In 2000, XHTML was invented to fix HTML. In 2006, jQuery was invented to fix JavaScript. In 2010, AngularJS was invented to fix jQuery. In 2013, React was invented to fix AngularJS. In 2012, TypeScript was invented to fix JavaScript. In 2014, Vue was invented to fix React and Angular. In 2016, Angular 2 was invented to fix AngularJS and React. In 2019, Svelte 3 was invented to fix React, Angular, and Vue. In 2019, React hooks were invented to fix React. In 2020, Vue 3 was invented to fix React hooks. In 2020 also, Solid was invented to fix React, Angular, Svelte, and Vue. In 2020, HTMX1 was invented to fix React, Angular, Svelte, Vue, Solid. 2021, React Suspense was invented to fix React. Again, in 2023, Svelte Runes was invented to fix Svelte. And in 2024, HTML is still used on 100% of websites. And this is from a Fireship video, well, inspired by Fireship video. In 2016, Jose Aguanagua published on Hacker Noon a brilliant and hilarious article about an anecdotal conversation between two web developers, one who hadn't touched web code for some years and the other who was still working in the field. Even after 8 years, it still holds up pretty well, except for the ending, where the author clearly underestimated how far the tentacles of the web would go. I'm just going to move back to the back end. I just can't handle these many changes in versions and additions and compilers and transpilers. The JavaScript community is insane if it thinks anyone can keep up with this. So this is the article, How It Feels to Learn JavaScript in 2016. I'm out. Peace. Like it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. And I just did that one off the top of my head. Okay, we're going to keep reading. Hang on. I just gotta do something here. All right, there we go. Okay. That conversation pretty much mimics my actual experience. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's exactly right. Yeah. There are things that you don't want to understand, right? Okay, so we read this part. Introducing React. After Facebook social media was released to the public, it soon became popular, grew in features, and turned into this very complex and slow application. To work around that, the people behind what is now called Meta decided to create a new JavaScript library called React, released to the public in 2013. Although many front-end frameworks are available today, the React ecosystem dominates the market, imposing all sorts of idiosyncrasies. Yeah, I'll zoom out a little bit here. So React, Node, jQuery, Angular, Express, ASP.NET Core, Vue, Next, ASP.NET, Spring Boot, WordPress, Flask, Django, Laravel, Angular, Fast API, Ruby on Rails, Svelte. I mean, these metrics might be a little bit different now since the creation of this article, which I think was 2014, or sorry, 2024. But yeah, okay, so 2023, it's probably a bit different now. React is the right solution for Facebook in the same way a hammer is the right tool to drive a screw. But worse than Facebook creating and using React is that soon after it was released, most tech companies around the globe started to believe they needed it in order to be as successful as Facebook. Life is not without irony now that Facebook's prestige has been fading away. One of the biggest changes introduced by React is that now everything should be asynchronous to avoid locking the UI when things get updated. So, if you want to change the state of something and check it later, you can't just simply do this. Variable equals test, if variable triple equals test, which is a hard equals, console log hello. To change the state of a variable in React, we need to call an asynchronous method. As a result, when the if statement checks for variable's value, there's no guarantee it has already been updated. The solution is to implement the useEffect callback and move the if statement into it like this. Import useState useEffect from React. Example equals variable set variable useState empty string. useEffect inner function set variable test, where set variable references here currently with an empty array at the end. Another useEffect with an inner function. If variable hard equals test console log hello, pass in variables or parameters that it is exposed to useEffect. Before you wonder, set variable will never return a promise or anything. So yes, you need a callback named useEffect, and it needs to have an array with the variables you want to handle. The problem here isn't limited to tripling the code and having a much more confusing syntax. It's the callback hell. It means that in practice, you can't debug your code anymore because the code flow is now super winding. It's not uncommon to see developers spreading things like console log past here all over the place. We have been working with UIs for over 50 years without needing to implement everything asynchronously by default. Only in specific cases where the application must perform a heavy operation in the background is the async approach useful to avoid locking the UI. In vanilla JavaScript, for example, methods like setTimeout, fetch, and even forAwait of are asynchronous, so the UI doesn't hang when they're called. Developers also have the option to make their own methods asynchronous. This approach offers a much easier and faster development process without sacrificing the user experience. But React is relentless in the shit business. For it, there's no such thing as static HTML. Literally, static HTML is the antithesis of everything that is React. React has no concept of static HTML. Every screen the user sees is the result of a JavaScript code, including React itself. Every screen the user sees is the result of a JavaScript code, including React itself, that generates the HTML either on the server side, SSR, or client side, CSR, with the latter being the default and therefore the most common. Most developers never heard about this concept until they realize their application is performing poorly, but then it's too late because migrating to SSR and React is a whole other nightmare. Even if you accomplish that, you're just shifting the inefficiency to the server, so global warming would still be looking at you. The user can check if the application is using CSR by requesting the browser to show the page source. If the content is just a template, it means the user machine is running JavaScript code to generate the HTML. Yes, folks, your battery life is most likely being compromised for no good reason. In React, you frequently have to deal with code in the middle of HTML, like React. Okay, let me read that again. In React, you frequently have to deal with code in the middle of HTML like React syntax. Here's an example. Is this, does anybody find this like actually like really readable? Like just out of curiosity, is there someone who's like, yeah, I can read like the whole thing's readable here. All good. Yeah, I would be curious to see if anybody finds this more readable than a vanilla counterpart. How can someone call this mess progress? Back when there was no JavaScript framework, the code was separated in three types of files: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The separation was clear, and even if the developer wanted to embed everything into the HTML, they would have dedicated tags completely detached from each other. Not saying it was pure joy in a colorful dream, but clearly a much better solution than what these frameworks impose. But bear with me, because we're just scratching the surface. I have no idea what this does. Yeah, laugh. You were a fool? Yeah, exactly, Battle. What a fool. Sucker. I see dead packages. The JavaScript framework frenzy implies the applications will be developed with the help of third-party plugins, or as they call them, packages. Modern web developers are often so reliant on these packages that they forget the basics of math and algorithms. So, packages such as isOdd returns true if the given number is odd and is an integer that does not exceed the JavaScript maximum safe integer. I just wanted to pull this up. Yeah, I've seen isOdd before. I've seen left pad before, but I'm pulling this up. String left pad. Literally just left pad a string. But in order to do it, you have to use, let me see, you have to use, there's a TypeScript definition, right? And then, right? Check out the source for isOdd. Sure. Let's check out the source for isOdd. Let's go see what isOdd is doing. I think the article covers it too, but okay. So we've got an ESLinter for some reason. We've got npm-rc. We've got a Travis builder. We've got a generator for a README file, and then here we go. What is this? Well, it requires is number, and then you pass in a value, and then you do the absolute of the value. If it's not a number, it's not a number. If it's not an integer, it's not an integer. If it's not a safe integer, it exceeds the maximum safe. And then you do modulo 2 equals 1. That's it. They are frighteningly popular. It resembles factory workers on an assembly line. No clue on how to build the parts, only how to plug them. To make things worse, many old limitations of JavaScript can still be seen in its latest version. For example, when trying to parse JSON, if there's an invalid character, the language won't inform you the index, so chances are you won't be able to pinpoint the offending character, especially in long inputs. Let's add one more package to fix that, shall we? The list of annoyances is so long that Microsoft decided to create TypeScript, a language written on top of JavaScript to overcome some of its limitations. But because browsers don't understand TypeScript, your application needs a package to transpile it to JavaScript. And because JavaScript has to be compiled on the client side, it means the browser version may be incompatible with some recent JavaScript features, so another step is needed to transpile modern JavaScript to legacy to ensure old browsers will be able to run the application properly. As you can imagine, each iteration makes the code fatter. The result of this ever-growing inefficiency is that simple applications usually have thousands of direct dependencies plus thousands of indirect ones, resulting in insanely large JavaScript files. All of this usually sent to the client machine to be downloaded, parsed, compiled, and executed just to generate the HTML, which is what matters in the end. It's nuts. In some cases, all it takes is one of these unknown package developers to screw their code, causing countless applications around the world to fall apart. That's precisely what happened with LeftPad, as discussed in a previous article on how BS has dominated the tech industry. And I think a lot of us know about LeftPad, and we have been over some of the security issues that also come along with this, which I don't think is directly discussed here. Median page weight over time from Web Almanac. We've gone over this data on previous live streams. Kilobytes loaded by date. I mean, it almost doubles every 4 years. You would think, I agree with this comment, you would think that with the advances that we've made with libraries and frameworks and optimizations, that we would actually be having a far more steady, a bit more flatlined, or not so much of a dramatic increase. This is way too dramatic for people, when you hear people who say, like, things have never been better. When a web developer checks out their project and calls npm install or yarn install, oh boy, another package manager, or npx now, which is kind of like a superset of npm, or bun, now, it usually downloads a large amount of packages into node modules subfolder. The catch? These package major versions are hard-coded in the project's package JSON file. Handle it with care because it's all very fragile. This means all the pressure on users to have their systems up to date doesn't apply to the dependencies of web applications, unless developers manually check each dependency update every week, which is, of course, very unlikely. And since each dependency may also have its own dependencies, you may find inside the package folder another node modules subfolder, which can also have dependencies of its own, and so on. Depending on the order these things are loaded, you might end up with a broken project due to mixed versions of the same package running at the same time. So imagine you have a tree of dependencies. Your top-level tree requires package A version 1 and package B version 2. Package B version 2 requires package D and E of some version. Package E, however, requires package A version 2, but your top level requires package A version 1. You might have a problem. Sure, there are packages to solve the problems with packages, and of course, they cause other problems that will require other packages. It's a recursive machine of chaos that literally makes a Hello World project require more than 40,000 files. They call this fun. But wait, because it gets worse. Since some dependencies are system-related, like Node, Java, and Yarn, if the developer updates the OS, they might break their application. That's one of the reasons why Docker is so popular, as it freezes a very specific OS state into a container that happens to work for a given project. After all, when having a problem, why not create a new tool to work around it instead of fixing the cause, right? That's modern web in a nutshell. One remarkable example can be seen in GitHub's blame page. Because it implements this stupid React viewport optimization, if you use the browser search feature to look for anything outside the viewport, the result will be empty. What did those geniuses do? They created their own search feature powered by React and garbage NPM packages, resulting in almost 3 megabytes of minified JavaScript code. If they could only know that simple static HTML can easily render interactive tables with thousands of rows even on a mid-range phone. Faster than a turtle, or maybe not. In a 2015 presentation, Tom Okino, one of React's core developers, said the following, and there is a link here to the YouTube video. People started playing around with React internally, and everyone had the same reaction. Okay, I have no idea if this is going to be performant enough, but this is so fun, I don't really care if it's too slow, somebody will make it faster. People started playing around with React internally, and everyone had the same reaction. Okay, I have no idea if this is going to be performant enough, but this is so fun, I don't really care if it's too slow, somebody will make it faster. Are you kidding me? They all knew that in JavaScript land, the more abstractions, the worse the performance. They were just hoping for someone to perform some sorcery, which, as we know, never happened and probably never will. Fast forward to 2018, when Netflix announced that they migrated their portal from React to vanilla JavaScript, managing to reduce JavaScript bundle size to 1/5, which resulted in 50% faster loading time. There's another link to that video there. Or an article, maybe. I think it's an article. In 2020, Jeremy Wagner wrote this amazing article where he conducted some performance tests comparing React to Vanilla.js to show one component on the screen. We're not talking about Vanilla.js being twice faster. No, we're talking about 24 times faster. Material UI, one of the most popular libraries for React with 4 million downloads per week, is another example of the performance disaster in the React ecosystem. This is the total time spent with JavaScript in mobile mode loading a screen with just buttons, same looking style. I mean, you can read a chart, right? 5,000 milliseconds up at the top, right? You start over here with around 500 buttons. The darker color is with Material UI. The lighter color is with no Material UI, or let's say vanilla. And as you increase the number of buttons, you can see we barely hit 500 milliseconds, maybe not even, whereas up here, we're at 5,000. Some people will try to mislead you with arguments like, no one will put thousands of buttons on a single page, when they're missing the point. These popular React packages are extremely inefficient even when compared to pure React, which we already know is slow because it's an abstraction over an abstraction. A static HTML, in comparison, takes 0 milliseconds in this test because it doesn't need JavaScript to achieve the same result. The increased entropy from the increased entropy from Material UI affects not just the JavaScript process, but also the final HTML, which has twice the number of DOM elements and 10 times the file size. Again, from the user's perspective, both Material UI and React look exactly the same in this test. In React Native, if you have a flat list component with more than 50 items with just text, performance will suck, and React will splash this BS in your face. Virtualized list. You have a large list that is slow to update. Make sure your render item function renders components that follow React performance best practices like pure component, should component update, etc. Now, if it knows what's wrong, why doesn't it do the right thing automatically by default? Well, that's missing the point. The truth is that it's simply unacceptable that in 2024, people are still trying to convince us that something as simple as a list could be slow in any reasonable scenario. It gets even more surreal when we read React's official documentation. Here are a list of props that can help to improve flat list performance. Remove clipped subviews. If true, views that are outside of the viewport are detached from the native view hierarchy. Pros. This reduces time spent on the main thread and thus reduces the risk of dropped frames by excluding views outside of the framework from the native rendering and drawing traversals. Cons. Be aware that this implementation can have bugs, such as missing content, mainly observed on iOS, especially if you're doing complex things with transforms and/or absolute positioning. Also note, this does not save significant memory because the views are not deallocated, only detached. React has no self-respect, to the point it admits its code can have bugs and even calls absolute positioning something complex. Really? If this doesn't sound pathetic, let's try a different approach then. In 1997, ID Software released Quake 2, a 3D accelerated game that was capable of delivering 60 frames per second on machines from that time. This means that every 16 milliseconds the engine had to process hundreds of polygons, textures, and dynamic lights, AI, physics, animations, multi-device input, multi-channel audio, I/O, network sync, HUD, etc., etc. We are talking about an application that is miles and miles ahead in terms of complexity compared to the vast majority of web apps we see nowadays. Currently, we have tiny machines in our pockets that are 100 times faster than the computers from 97. But still, a website that only shows a static table takes some seconds just to have its JavaScript code generate the HTML for the user. What went wrong? That we not just achieved this crap, but worse than that, we normalized it. Current web applications should be running at least 100 times faster than Quake 2 used to run, and on machines from that era. Yeah, laugh. Vindicated. That's right. Developers seem to have no idea how fast HTML and CSS can be parsed and rendered. The slowness of the web is not caused by these two guys unless the developer is doing something amazingly stupid. Even vanilla.js can perform decently when used with parsimony. For instance, it can parse 1,000 entries JSON and populate them into an HTML table in a tiny fraction of a second. It's so fast that after downloading the JSON, no asynchronous call is needed for the rest of the process. Imagine that. All the optimizations that developers have been hungry for to avoid low performance on the web is mostly caused by the inefficiency of these bloated frameworks and their packages. It's completely nuts that modern tools normalize the concept that it will deliver crap by default, and it's up to the developer to find a workaround if they don't feel happy with the result. Imagine a car manufacturer telling mechanics, make your client's car work properly by optimizing the engine. Oh, and good luck trying to find external help to fix the issues you're facing, because for each situation, there are dozens of answers that may or may not apply depending on the magic combination of tools and versions behind the application. And there are so many combinations that chances are your case is unique. It's not uncommon to read things like answer A didn't work for me, but answer B did. JavaScript bundle therapy. There are countless tools to parse and bundle the JavaScript code of web applications, but Webpack is by far the most popular one. It's no surprise it's written in JavaScript because why not, right? What is amazing, though, is how terrible it performs, not just regarding CPU performance, but especially memory-wise. 5 gigs of RAM to bundle a React application with 150,000 lines of code, not including the dependencies. All this obscenity is seen as normal nowadays. No one bothers to question it anymore. We're supposed to shut up and be grateful for this rubbish ecosystem. What's even more annoying is that Webpack's main mission is not accomplished decently. Instead of removing all unused JavaScript code, the so-called tree shaking, it insists on bundling useless code that will never be reached. For example, imagine class A. Import React, import my enum from class B. Here's class A as a constant with an inner function, if my enum, spit out hello, and class B. Import React, pull in the CSS baseline from Material UI, export the enum item, go into the class B with an inner function, return a div with CSS baseline. Because class A is importing this decoupled enum from class B and it doesn't use CSS baseline, we would expect the JavaScript bundler to exclude it, but that's not what happens. In other words, it will recursively bundle all the imports of the declared classes. When you sum up all those mistakes, the result is something like this. Hang on, I need to take a sip of coffee. But if the code is not being used, that shouldn't be a problem, right? We have to remember. I see he goes over used versus unused, right? 50% of unused code. We have to remember that JavaScript code is usually downloaded, parsed, and compiled on the client side. So, depending on its size and the machine, it can result in very poor performance even after caching. Not to mention shorter battery life. That's the main reason why most applications ship their code in the so-called minified version, just another workaround to optimize something flawed in its concept. Sometimes I wonder if web development is not just a prank. Just take a look at this yarn nonsense when you try to call yarn install package. Yarn install, it's been replaced with add to add new dependencies. Run yarn add React Native CLI instead. Developers behind Yarn simply decided to remove a well-established keyword used to install packages, and to make matters worse, they added a message to teach the user the right way of doing it, which is way more work than just installing the thing since they know exactly what the user is trying to do. There's some sadism in these guys' souls. Look at this. Orphan Yarn files, because yes, congrats for the asymmetric number convention. How far the web crap can go. What about server side then? It's probably more sane as it has to be efficient and reliable, correct? Well, since 2009, when Node.js was released, all kinds of servers have been created and ported to this JavaScript framework. At this point, it couldn't be more predictable the fact that Node.js is mainly written in JavaScript, a language that is very limited, inefficient, and clearly not designed for anything close to handling a server. There's not even support to multi-thread. Let's step back a bit and think about what's happening here. In a static compiled language like C++, C++, or Rust, the developer compiles the application once so users don't have to do it ever. Now, with JIT, compiled languages like JS, not only does each user have to compile the code, but every single time they run the application, it has to be compiled again. Not to mention that even after compiled, JavaScript will not perform as fast as a static compiled language. Finally, stack on top that all this garbage code introduced by JavaScript frameworks, the magnitude of inefficiency is just insane. Okay, let's avoid online applications as much as possible because most of them are clearly screwed. Let's try desktop versions of the applications we need, like Postman, this tool made to test endpoints. We've used Postman before, right? It's just a way to test API endpoints and pass data around and see the inputs and outputs of your endpoints, right? That's all it is. If you smell web in this desktop app, you're not wrong. Postman is written using Electron, meaning it has a full Chromium browser embedded, including DevTools, libffmpeg, etc. And surprise, it's written in React Native. That's right, Ghost. It's an Electron, so it needs an account. And here you go. React Native. Yes, your desktop application is, in reality, a browser accessing React Native code that depends on countless packages just to generate mundane HTMLs. So what's the price for all that? Well, in version 11.3.2 for Linux, there are 22,000 files taking 410 megabytes of space storage and more than 700 megabytes of RAM to load the offending initial screen. I just would like to read this to you one more time. In version 11.3.2 of Postman for Linux, there are 22,000 files taking 410 megabytes of space storage and more than 700 megabytes of RAM to load the initial screen. They want us to believe that the newest curl, 8.8.0 for Linux, while more powerful and having only 3 files, taking 1 meg of space storage combined and consuming just 10 megs of RAM, is this light because it has no UI. Sure. Sure, you can see 30 megabytes down at the bottom. Might be a little difficult to see, but you can see down at the bottom. And you can see that the load time to the point where it finished was around 1700 ms. Right around here, it seems to have finished. Postman needs over 25 megs of minified JavaScript to show a login screen. This Electron nightmare is everywhere, including many popular desktop applications such as Discord, Dropbox, GitHub, Teams, Spotify, Visual Studio Code, WhatsApp, etc. They all behave similarly to Postman. And in the mobile realm, it's no different because most software companies don't want to invest money in a different application for each platform. So if a web application also has a mobile or desktop version, chances are they all are written using some sluggish JS framework and come with an embedded browser. In the past, a flexible programming language would be multi-platform, and the compiler would be responsible for generating a binary for each platform. But because JavaScript compiler is in the browser, developers see no other way except shipping their desktop and mobile applications with an embedded browser. By the way, browsers nowadays are huge monsters that have more lines of code than the Linux kernel. The only realm untouched by JS is then the operating system, right? Nope. On Linux, the most popular graphical environment, GNOME, has 50% of its shellcode written in JavaScript. What's this? What's this? What's going? No. What? This is JavaScript. No. Tell me it ain't so. You can't tell me it ain't so, can you? No. Because it's JavaScript. in GNOME. And third-party extensions for GNOME have to be written entirely in JavaScript. PolicyKit, a popular Linux application that allows unprivileged processes to speak to privileged processes, also depends on a JavaScript engine to work. Firefox version 128.0 source code, more JavaScript than any other language. A glimpse of sanity. What's the solution then? While I could argue that static HTMLs would be enough for most web apps, it's understandable that a developer might wish for certain conveniences like templates or components, automatic DOM update, support for third-party plugins, etc. Luckily, the world still has a few sane people, and some of them decided to create SvelteKit, a lightweight multi-platform framework focused on performance that gets faster and smaller each major release. SvelteKit doesn't impose any of the BS trends promoted by React, and out of the box, it does what we expect from a tool. It helps developers while providing a decent experience to the users. SvelteKit highlighting, and I will agree that some of these things that are called out like code splitting, so that you only the code you need for the current page is loaded. That's great. Asset preloading, so that waterfalls of files requesting other files are prevented. File hashing, so that your assets can be hashed forever. Like these are all like good things. But I would actually throw this back at the author's face and go, do you even need these things? Are these not are these goals not able to be accomplished using other methods that we have available without a framework? However, if the web application is intrinsically complex, JavaScript is just not suitable, period. And then we get to the bad part. In this case, I'd recommend using Blazor, which uses WebAssembly to run C# code directly in the browser. No, I'll pass on that. But this is good. Perhaps the most important thing is to avoid over-complexity. React is just one big example, but there are many other ways to add unnecessary entropy to your project. Do not assume you have to fight code for days just to implement something trivial. Start with the absolute simplest ecosystem possible, experiment with things. Avoid dependencies as much as you can. The fewer moving parts, the better. If things start to become too complicated, or you feel you don't have much control over what's happening under the hood, go back and challenge your team to think outside the box. It's totally fine to give up on things if they're not going the right direction. At this point, we have many decades of human experience in the field, amazing hardware and tools, so there are no excuses. And then a lot of people were complaining, well, then you posted this on Medium, which is like a really bad place to post it. It's like, well, good exposure though. So then the last thing I'm going to do not this. We're going to read some of the comments. Because some of these are very good. So I'm going to take a break for a second. And we're going to read some of the comments. We're going to get into some of the rebuttals from people because there were definitely a few. And then I'll end the stream. Yeah, no ships today. It's all boring code. Um, it's too boring to watch me do cleanup code on the ship game. Hey, Team JetBoop, how's it going, man? Thanks for popping in. Okay, let me just do one or two quick things here, and then we'll just keep going. All right. Okay. So after reading all that and watching all those videos, let's read some of the comments. All right. We're going to read two series of comments. One is going to be from the Medium article itself, and one will be from the Hacker News posting of this, because there are some people who push back on it, and it's important to hear the pushback. I very much enjoyed reading your article, and I can relate to almost all of your experiences with the JS Madness ecosystem. But at the end, I was very surprised to see that you still recommend Svelte and client-side HTML generation. I ditched all client-side frameworks and packages for my projects, both hobby and professional. Back to SSR, proper HTML, CSS, and JS where it's really needed. Best decision ever. And the author says, I'm glad you enjoyed reading the article. Regarding your surprise, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear enough. I meant to say that, like you, I would recommend HTML, CSS, Vanilla JS for almost all web applications. However, I understand developers who want some of the conveniences provided by frameworks, and for them, I would recommend Svelte because it's light and straightforward. Personally, I would not use Svelte if I had a choice because the raw option is much easier, faster, and more reliable. What I've been noticing is that developers nowadays are afraid of implementing features from scratch, even if they're not complex. LeftPad and IsOdd have entered the chat. Instead, they want to use as many packages as possible because it seems easier and more reliable. The irony is that most of the time, they are not. I agree with a lot of your sentiment, but this one I have to disagree with. While some developers may be afraid of developing features from scratch, the vast majority either don't have the time or want to use something that the next person who maintains this has a chance of being familiar with. And of course, many devs don't get an option here. The answer is predetermined by the company or client they are working for. Not to say that this is a good way to go, but I think reflecting the sad reality here is important. Understood and agreed. And I would actually counter back to this person with, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether there's a pushback or a predetermined state of things. If you do not try and escape this box, or at least understand fundamental things so that you can do them yourself, you will never be able to make an argument why you should do these things when the opportunity arises for you to say something that might change the course of this sad reality. So the defeatist idea that you should just give in and accept the fact that, hey, if you're afraid to do something, you know, don't do it because, like, what choice do you have? You might as well just go with the status, go with the flow, is a bad decision to make in the long run. It might be a good short-term decision, but not a good long-term decision. Isn't that how you got fired for using HTMX? Yeah, because a new CTO came into the company and was like, "Oh, you're single-handedly running this entire website by yourself with HTMX and PHP because you kept it so simple. No, I want to hire a team of React developers. Off you go." New day, same story. Your complaints sound like a skill issue. Most musicians are terrible. at Guitar Hero, but are obviously more skilled. Your response clearly shows you're in the Guitar Hero class. Your comment really had no single argument. Can you please elaborate? This guy right here is why we are where we are. Programming is not a true profession, so any schmuck can claim to be a developer. I think anger at an evolving landscape attempting to better itself is why you are where you are. Keep complaining. The rest of us will keep building. Building crap that increases the warming and degradation of our planet, screws over other engineers, and is completely devoid of any pride or excellence. I bet you're fun at parties. That totally depends on the height of the egos around me. Andrew, yes, it's a skill issue in a way. JavaScript and web development have always had a low barrier to entry, and the result has been dev teams that are not as qualified as those who develop server-side code. Sweeping generalization about the qualities of a particular subset of professionals based on their area of expertise. Reality is a bit more complex and nuanced than that, my friend. I've been doing software, well, not anymore, I just retired, for 40 plus years and witnessed firsthand the advent of the web through its many developmental permutations. In that time, I've worked with a few genuinely brilliant web engineers. Doing web front end doesn't mean you're a bad engineer, but what I've mostly seen is that web front end devs are just not as skilled in software engineering principles. Whether that's because it's easier to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so there are more web devs that are junior or lack formal training, or because the environment just doesn't allow software to be structured robustly, resulting in bad habits, I can't say. Yeah, going rogue in a big company can be dangerous, but if nobody does it, then nothing ever changes. That's the point. Not doing it means that all you're doing is perpetuating whatever's happening. You're not making any changes. You're just accepting the changes and continuing them. Many job postings feature a tech stack that includes at least two front-end frameworks, usually Angular and React. I think it's a ghosting tactic. Yeah. Team Jetpoop. I can see from this discussion thread they're jumbling up all kinds of ideas until nothing definite is being learned. Idea 1. Big JS ecosystems exist for big teams, not just big web teams like New York Times, but also thousands of solopreneurs. A big number 2, just educating them. 2. Big teams being forced to squish all the functionalities into the same spa, but if the world wasn't run by the same non-thinking CTOs, then web pages, web apps would have more room to breathe. There would be far less spa, and that makes room for idea 3, which is simple JS, handcrafted, no React, which then leads to 4, things like HTMX feel natural, no spa. So we got to essentially trade big web teams for new hotness, lean organizations with a max of 22 employees. That's how I look at this discussion thread. It's a mix of ideas. Unless we break up the separate ideas, nothing makes sense. We'll never move the needle. I would actually argue why well, yeah, we probably agree. I think we agree on pretty much everything. Yeah, I think even in a big team, you probably don't need to be doing these things. You could have a big team and not having this crazy set of like complications, but if that's true, then yeah, you would actually run with a leaner team because you would be doing more like simpler things. So yeah, another response. I agree with a lot of what you said. The unfortunate obsession with React, the dependency hell, the bloat of Electron apps. The reason we don't get out of this mess easy is that we educated a whole generation of developers to work exclusively with React, and the job market rarely offers an alternative. Still, I was quite surprised that you claim JS is interpreted, where it has been JIT compiled for more than a decade. Also, React and React Native are completely different beasts. Node might not be the fastest environment, but mostly it competes with Java and PHP. Apart from gaming, I don't see a lot of use cases for WASM, and I strongly doubt that it will make your projects simpler. Thanks a lot for the clarifications, says the author. I changed the article to mention that JavaScript is JITted. Regarding React and React Native, don't you think they have enough in common to be mentioned together in an article criticizing the web development mess? Both share a similar syntax and core concepts, but React Native's purpose is to build mobile apps, which makes them rather different. Example, it creates mobile API components, not HTML DOM. Okay. While you've used a shockingly negative tone in this article, there's our tone policer. There's always some tone policer somewhere. It's hard to disagree with the facts that you've brought up here. I've experienced many situations, especially lately, of dependency mismanagement, application code disorganization, and component bloat. It's very disappointing to see how the monorepo and micro frameworks have gone from the fringe to an everyday occurrence, often without good cause. However, when a React project is well organized, the dependencies are kept minimal and components modules are kept small. It's fun to use. It feels more natural to me, but probably also to many others, than Vue, Svelte, Alpine, Angular, even than vanilla. And it has an ecosystem, for better or worse, built up over a long time. Are we at decades yet? Yes, you write JavaScript in your HTML, just like PHP and HTML intertwine, so that you can see that something happens here. Okay, React is asynchronous. In what world is the internet instantaneous? Should we unload the page every time and wait for the server to do the work, flashing an empty white page while the browser waits for a response? That's a hard sell to any client willing to pay a livable salary. This is based on the assumption that servers are not fast enough these days. This is this is like saying, like, if you remove React, you automatically push a magic button that time travels you back to early 2000s when servers couldn't handle server-based operations fast enough. Except that today they can. You don't need React. I posit that React is fun, just like driving a car is fun, and what you've sort of done here is complain about how complex a car is under the hood, and gone further by saying that it's crazy that we need tools and parts that make the parts that make the parts that go into the car. All the while, you say that horses have gotten faster and we should just go back to riding them all the time, also pointing out that bicycles are a viable option. Perhaps it's not perfect, but everything has its place. A React app with all its complexity is great when you want to create interfaces that interact asynchronously with data and you want to work fast, perhaps even alone. An HTML website is perfect for most sites, displaying simple info that changes infrequently. But I like what you've written here because you'll ruffle feathers. You've ruffled mine and reinforced my belief in how to get things done more simply. The problem is that React is not just intrinsically slow, verbose, and hard to debug, bringing essentially no benefit to anyone, especially the user. It's the fact this well-organized thing you say is just too hard to achieve in practice. The issue starts when we create a Hello World project and it comes with 40,000 files, countless dependencies, crazy infrastructure. And the application at this point is doing nothing except printing a simple message. The whole concept of client-side rendering is just nuts, and the issues that React promises to address don't affect most web applications in the first place. In the end, it's more about mimicking what big tech companies do, which makes no sense, especially when we take a look at how garbage meta products are. The React ecosystem is more than 10 years old now, yes, but how many versions have required a complete rewrite of our applications? What's the real benefit here? Now they're finally trying to convince people that server-side rendering is better, after more than freaking 10 years trying to convince us the exact opposite. The same applies to Webpack, which is now being replaced with RSPack, which is written in Rust, which is much faster to bundle. Of course, in this insane web dev world, nothing comes for free. RSPack generates larger JS bundles, so from the user's perspective, it's worse than Webpack. Should we unload the page every time and wait for the server to do the work, flashing an empty white page while the browser waits for a response? I see what you're trying to say, but that's a common misconception among React developers. Everything you write using React will always be converted to vanilla JavaScript by your transpiler. So if something can be achieved with React, it can be achieved with vanilla JS as well. It's not just that. As I mentioned in the article, we don't need everything to be asynchronous, just specific tasks like server requests, which can be handled asynchronously in vanilla JS using fetch. Once you understand that React is just an entropic layer and that vanilla JS is much easier and faster, you'll realize the trap you've gotten yourself into. It's never too late. Even vanilla JS can perform decently when used with parsimony. It's well beyond decent now. With the JS engines of the last few years, you can get almost compiled code performance in some cases faster than Swift with safe array types. We tested it. It is truly shocking. You don't even need JS Hermes engine. The default engines are fine. If you are doing pixel level image processing, JS will probably be slower than unsafe memory code like C or C++, or say video decompress. But if you are experiencing performance hits on modern browsers or in React, it seems far more likely that the rendering engine or DOM ops are causing them than JS. It's fine. Yeah. I don't think there was anything um, in here. Whenever our React Native project won't build because Xcode has changed, or React Native has changed, or one or more of the 1,000 node modules has changed in a breaking manner, all you have to do is change X to use the new version. Of course, when one package writers say all you have to do, all can become huge. I search for articles like these to quell my mental pain. We salute you. You are doing us a service. HTMX CEOs are welcome here, not just welcome. I am the lead. I'm the lead HTMX CEO. I literally have lead HTMX.ceo. That's me. And I've interviewed Carson on this channel too before. And like I said, I've used HTMX on a massive website. I got fired for it because the CTO wanted a team of React devs. Wow, that was a lot to take in. It must be nice to think of the good old days as some utopia where everything was fast, simple, and reliable. Well, I was coding in the good old days, and it wasn't all unicorns and rainbows. You say we started with crap and added more crap on top. This is a very naive way of looking at this. In reality, what happened was there was a problem, a solution was found, and that solution became popular because it solved that problem well. This, my friend, is called progress. You clearly don't understand how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript work. Take the time to learn how computers work under the covers, then how browsers work, then learn how business works. No matter what you do, you will always have compromises. There is no magical solution to all the problems you face. Each solution will introduce new problems to solve. You need to learn how to evaluate these compromises and which ones you need to make to be successful in your solution. Then and only then will you be in a position to critique these compromises and propose a solution that has the compromises that are acceptable to your situation. Right on. I'm with those who say step 1, write in only well-formed semantic HTML to establish functionality and accessibility, add classless CSS to make it pretty, and add minimal JS if absolutely necessary. Programming is not a profession. You cannot just call yourself an electrical engineer or a stationary engineer. You must have the proper credentials. Software development is open to literally anyone, and millions of low-skilled people do this job globally. This wasn't the case 50 years ago, when the quality of most systems was vastly higher. Example, software helped take us to the moon on hardware that had thousands of times less power than a smartwatch. Nothing has changed. And yes, software development is a profession, like being an electrician or a lawyer. The problem is with terminology. The phrase software engineer has been accosted to replace the more accurate term, software enthusiast. If you don't agree with me, then I feel you probably simply have never met a true software engineer, which honestly isn't surprising. I myself have only met less than a handful in the 25 years of software engineering I've been involved in. Most are cockroaches, I openly admit this, but let me assure you that software engineer, in its true meaning, is absolutely a profession, and if you are ever lucky enough to meet a real one, you'll understand. Modern developers switch jobs every few months. Playing to trends is understandable, and so are the consequences. That sounds like a nightmare. I've been a programmer for 40 years. I've only had 3 employers. Guess those days are over. Amazing. I agree with everything. I have been saying the same thing for years now. Why can't people see this? I assume it's because there are companies making lots of money out of this mess. I remember that JS only app days, there were often huge piles of spaghetti with no structure or consistency. For complex apps, some sort of framework is necessary. For complex apps, just avoid JavaScript. And use what exactly? I think WebAssembly is the future, but JavaScript runs the internet and will for years. It now has massively encroached on the server side. Not bad for a Netscape 1990s macro language. Well done, Mr. Ike. Many moons ago, I built a website for a live events company which handles tens of thousands of visitors per day using plain vanilla HTML, CSS, and JS with PHP, and it never misses a heartbeat. Orders are processed quickly, customer queries are received without any issues, and the non-bloat website helps the company generate huge profits. Web development is overly complex by design these days because if you're using React, it's easy to explain how complex it is to a non-technical customer simply because React is complex in terms of what you get out of it versus what you put in it, and you can charge more. It was good days when I wrote web apps on bare metal DOM. It was a ticket reservation system. Think of it as a really big system, but it consisted of only 200 KB JS code. Okay. Every one of the frameworks produced totally bloated and inaccessible code for people with poor eyesight. None of them produce semantically correct HTML. No one cares until the customers complain or the company gets sued. Not sure when you would ever get sued for not providing semantically correct HTML. I wholeheartedly agree with everything mentioned in your excellent article, and I enjoyed reading the comments too. Some of the comments were very predictable. Despite your well-hung arguments, some people will defend the use of memory hogging, battery zapping libraries and frameworks to the death, just to simply display a simple text page with a few JPEGs, tut-tut. Browsing websites built with React and the like is excruciating. While React devs may find it fun to use, as some have said here, the same can't be said for the end user, and I say that without ambiguity. I can see in real time my remaining battery percentage drain before my eyes when jumping from website to website or even when switching from page to page. Web development for many years now has become a race to the bottom. It's incredible how its current state has become accepted as the norm. Relying on packages, which in turn rely on other packages, is begging for trouble, as most web devs are very good at plugging things together, but it seems many simply can't code themselves out of trouble and rely on other packages to implement fixes or add new features. It was only a short while ago that panic was brewing in the React community. When there was silence from the React dev team, there were rumors that continued React support just may come to an end. I found that quite amusing. I simply thought, if you built from good old vanilla, there would be no reason to panic. I'll be starting a project soon, which will be desktop mobile app with web to complement it. For the web, I'll be using strictly HTML, CSS, JS on the web with little to no libraries and certainly no frameworks. And as for desktop mobile apps, I may rely on .NET MAUI or maybe even Flutter for the GUI, but certainly not Electron with its sometimes dodgy text rendering on certain GPUs and overall sluggishness. Absolutely bang on the money. Frontend is a hot mess and getting worse. JS and its associated frameworks have been the biggest enabler for mediocre developers and hobbyists to enter the software development arena without a care in the world for solid or at least sane engineering practices. The amount of unsustainable crap out there is absolutely shocking, and shitification and rot everywhere. Nowadays, web apps have much richer interfaces than decades ago. Trying to build a modern UI in an old ecosystem is real pain. For me, Next.js React is a breeze compared to Vanilla.js, even though the fast evolution also brought some garbage like mixed function components with class components and mixed async code with promises. Yet, I still don't see why React leads to fight code for days. Maybe you can elaborate on your experience a bit further. New projects introduce many new concepts, and some ideas make their way into the longer standing projects when experimentation is over. That is the evolution of these projects. Sure, it comes with bumps on the road and increasing page weight, but modern web apps are nowhere near comparable to those from decades ago. If the author replies, if adding triple the code, confusing syntax, callback hell, complicated and fragile infrastructure, updates that require rewriting applications, worse performance for developers, and significantly worse performance for users aren't enough for you to consider how problematic React and its ecosystem are, I don't know what else would convince you. Even the developers behind it admit it's slow. Maybe you should try building an application using vanilla.js and see how it goes instead of clinging to old memories. Above all, you seem to miss the point of the article. New isn't always better. The driving force behind all this technological frenzy is profit, and we need to be critical of what's being offered to us. And then another article link regarding fighting code for days. I've worked in web development for a long time, and I have many friends and former coworkers in the same situation. We've seen countless instances across different teams, companies, and countries of people spending large amounts of time to implement simple features or fix trivial bugs using these trendy web frameworks. The problem is that this has become normalized. Many people have never experienced anything different, so they assume it has to be this way. Tip, it does not. Then there's someone asking about WASM and stuff. That's fine. Somebody making a joke. Somebody generally agreeing. Boilerplate stuff. Okay. This one's a touch interesting. Just one thing. Today, browsers pretty much try to obey standards, but that wasn't always the case. From the time browsers became the premier rendering tool for end users until around 2020, they often varied in fundamental ways. Some of the younger developers have never experienced something like endless debugging and rewriting of code because stuff ran on Netscape or Firefox, but not on Internet Explorer 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, just pick one. This is actually quite true. I would agree with this statement in a vacuum. jQuery was mainly a tool to bridge the gaps, or the differences, between various browser vendors and their versions. Somehow, since 2015, the situation has started to slowly improve. Nowadays, as a not only but quite often front-end developer, I can afford to go fully native with server-side rendered, declarative, shadow DOM templates, import maps, and ES modules and whatnot. I don't understand why these frameworks are still used and even thought of as the best thing since sliced bread, Yagni. Yet in the past, when we old-timers still carved petroglyphs into walls of rock, some of these tools, in particular jQuery, served as lifesavers. I think they developed a life of their own, like a religion, and people stuck to them, because it gives them some kind of consolation to use what most others are using. And yet again, only since recently are front-end developers able to cut off these ties to the past. Recursive Machine of Chaos. Found the right name for my band. This is also a good one. I agree with a lot of things you've mentioned. Coming from the embedded robotics domain, I was shocked about the overall state of web domain, over-engineering, framework fragmentation, tooling fragmentation, debuggability, performance with regards to latency, etc. If it's about plain websites, let's get rid of Next.js. Use lightweight alternatives if required at all, like Astro Build instead. Everyone forced to use Python in the back end is happy to visit Python Plain English, whatever this is, for ideas about how to avoid the front end and microservice bloat, and then Tori instead of Electron. About this Quake 2 thing reminds me of the saying, and I'm paraphrasing, the more speed and memory introduced, the more software can become crap. Is odd. Yeah. The product line I work for uses Angular. You can embed HTML template code into an Angular component, but I still create the separate HTML template for this very reason, to keep them all separate. Yeah, okay. Accurate. I'm a front-end engineer for 10 plus years at big tech. This is absolutely accurate and caused me pain. Along those lines, and sharing the same sentiment, I recommend watching on YouTube Casey Muratori's talk called The 30 Million Line Problem and Jonathan Blow's Preventing the Collapse of Civilization. The author says, I just watched the 30 million line problem. Thanks for suggesting. I've mentioned Casey Muratori at least twice in other articles, one about how BS has dominated the tech industry, where Jonathan Blow's presentation was also mentioned, and another about clean code. I think he's on the right side of the battle, but he makes too many mistakes and is too arrogant, to the point he disables comments in his videos. The reason is clear. He doesn't want to damage his reputation since he sells online courses. In the video you recommended, for instance, he mentions the growing number of lines of code in the Linux kernel as something getting out of control. However, this growth is primarily due to the addition of support for new hardware. While he argues that hardware manufacturers should agree upon a standard, this expectation is unrealistic and unlikely to happen anytime soon. That does not negate his argument. This is kind of a stupid take. He makes an argument that is unrealistic, therefore argument bad. Another significant source of code in the kernel is the support for various architectures it runs on, including x86, x86-64, ARM, RISC-V, and more. Finally, there are many file systems. The diversity was simply much smaller in 95. Linux can be extremely fast. I developed a distro that can boot a modern PC in literally 3 seconds with no hibernation or cheating. It's ridiculously small and snappy. Not to mention, many small devices can boot even faster. So the amount of lines is not necessarily a problem, especially because in the case of the Linux kernel, most of the lines are not even compiled in each environment. Another mistake he makes is regarding the Mantle API, claiming it was invented to address bad AMD GPU drivers. That's just wrong. Mantle was created to bypass the abstraction layers of the two main 3D APIs, DirectX and OpenGL. Again, I understand this point. There was indeed a way to improve performance by replacing specific bad code. Thankfully, DirectX 12 and Vulkan did just that, and Mantle was deprecated. As much as I don't like the way software is developed nowadays, I have to admit that in some specific areas, things that require performance have significantly improved, like video encoding, decoding, and games. We can't deny how complex and performant games are today. Does Muratori really think that NVIDIA and AMD introduce overhead in their drivers just for fun? It's a fierce competition between these companies, with new players like Intel and several Chinese companies recently joining in. The amount of optimization these companies apply to each game in very specific scenarios is astounding. I bet a chunk of the drivers is made up of if-else statements to handle these cases, resulting in more lines of code precisely to achieve higher performance. What angers me is seeing simple apps that from the user's perspective are basically as complex as they were 20 years ago, but perform much worse on modern hardware. This is unacceptable, and that's why I wrote the article. We need to bring this problem to the table because younger generations have no good references and believe that JavaScript frameworks are the only viable solution when programming. Okay, that's a repeat. Yeah, React is madness and bloatware. Okay. This guy says, I think you should check your facts about React. React's virtual DOM is actually more performant than directly selecting and manipulating the DOM with vanilla.js. Regarding React performance, could you provide a source to support what you're saying? No source provided. Okay, and the last set of comments we're going to read are from the Hacker News version of the article because they also provide different perspectives as well. Hey, Team Jet Poop, thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. I missed it earlier because I was reading. Let me have one more sip of my coffee. After we read these comments, that's it. It's over. This was a slog of a stream. I appreciate everybody who was watching, but like, and nobody covers these topics. You've got people who like shill these things as like, they're the things to do. You've got other programming channels. That's what's going on in other programming channels. That what you're getting taught something apparently. Nobody, nobody that I know of is getting behind a camera. A very few, like Thread Interactive would be one. The other video we watched, what you get is crap like this. Nobody's actually like willing to go through the slog like this and actually like read these articles, read these comments, break down the arguments, and try and present like here's a problem and here's how we can avoid the problem, or come up with a solution. This is what programmers, especially the new programmers, need to see, not not anything else. At least right now. No, Lawler. I prefer the real ones. One sec. Okay, let me make sure that my layout is good, that it can be read proper. My face is not. They're real ones. All you have to do is code them into existence. All right. So we'll go through these, and then I'll do like a whatever closing thing for the video, and then that'll be that. Okay, so in response to, again, this Medium article, let me maybe zoom in a little. React, and NPM for that matter, is not all web development, in the same way that Windows is not the only OS. Vanilla JavaScript these days is an absolute joy to code in, and highly performant compared to the past. Even lazy loading modules are supported natively by browsers these days. You can go a long way just using purely built-in default functionality. I avoid NPM and React and live my professional life quite happily without them, doing professional development using TypeScript and Angular with Bazel. For fun home projects, there is Dino, which is also lovely. Bun looks interesting, but appears to want to ape NPM, so it is a no for me. Response. So you aren't using Vanilla.js, you're using Angular, yet another framework. Incidentally, I've been working on a hobby project and for fun decided to use Vanilla.js to interact with all browser APIs directly, not even jQuery. It's been fun and easy, partly because modern web browser APIs have gotten so good and are very well documented on MDN. The point where Stack Overflow and LLMs don't really help much. It's been fantastic. If you want to enjoy pure HTML, CSS, and JS, try Van.js, a web components library. I don't think these guys read the original article, but anyways. I am not sure the author really knows what they're talking about when comparing today's web development with earlier systems. First of all, the reason for use effect is not directly asynchronicity. It's mostly an optimization to give React control over what code it needs to run when the state changes. This is because with React, you basically re-render a document with every state change. And in order to speed this up, React needs to know what code depends on what part of the state. Admittedly, not pretty, but all of the more automated model view controller-like systems have mechanisms to detect or handle model changes. They are completely wrong about asynchronicity. Since the 80s, GUIs have been using event loops. Windows 3.x did this, and even really old UIs like Gem did. When using an event loop, you must execute operations asynchronously, or the event loop will block. That's not new at all. What's new is that these days, applications are interacting a lot with the network, and these are blocking operations. They require asynchronicity in an event loop. This wasn't really the case back in the days before the internet, when everything was local, and for longer computations, you had to call functions like yield to give time to the UI. He mentions threads, but they didn't really become a thing before the early 2000s, and threads never worked very well with most UIs, except the good old BIOS. It's easy to complain about issues with today's dev frameworks and easy to overlook the limitations in the past. UI development was always a pain, especially for applications that are larger than the typical demo app. I have worked on apps using Gem, MFC, Qt, GTK, TCL, TK, AWT, Swing, JavaFX. It doesn't matter. It always sucks one way or the other. Today's web-based UIs and their dev tools are a marvel in many ways. They're like building pyramids. Like you can easily update them without going from computer to computer or let user run install programs. They easily adapt to all kinds of screen resolutions and screen orientations. You can easily debug them in a browser or even an end user's computer. You have package managers that make it easy to add and later update libraries. Certainly, not everything is perfect. I still kind of hate UI development, but it's a huge improvement over everything we had in the past. Whatever Kool-Aid this person's drinking, I want some because it clearly makes you a delusional dolt. And that's how I want to feel. It must feel good this way. Hard agree. They also glossed over JS using a single-threaded model precisely to avoid the huge mental overhead of dealing with multi-threaded models. I'm saying this is why it happened, and this is the problem they aimed to solve. I'm not advocating either way. The other thing they missed is why people move to React in droves is so simple it's possible we've just forgotten because it's a de facto approach. Co-location of declaration, behavior, and styling. React took us out of the X belongs with all the X things mental model and allowed us to create isolated X does this thing and looks like this, things that require far less mental overhead to drop in while making changes to a potential foreign code base. This is exactly why Facebook preferred React to the status quo. Engineers changing one thing in one place with predictable effects is wonderful for teams operating at wide, deep scales. Again, I'm not advocating for any of this. I just don't think skipping over history or twisting it into an unrecognizable ball gives any forward momentum to conversations about the evolution of UI UX. Hey, Slendy Dev, how you doing, man? They easily adapt to all kinds of screen resolutions. He thinks React does that? Apparently. Is your comeback. When it comes up, just ask what modern UI actually means. Further ask what old UI means. Yeah. That's exactly right. What is modern UI and what is old UI? That's right. And there's your differentiator. That's a good way to put it, Laugh. Just checking in? Good. I'm glad, man. Yeah, everything's going well here. I'm just having a rant. Okay. Then there's there's some, I wanted to skip that one. Okay. If all you have is React, everything looks like a spa. I honestly think the real problem is that we have a whole generation of web devs that only know React. I just don't understand React. It makes things slower, less responsive, just a worse browsing experience in general, all to serve JSON instead of HTML. The user experience is worse and the developer experience is worse. React was invented to save Facebook money on the billions of requests they get by sending minimal JSON data and having JavaScript do all the rendering. Under Facebook, I can understand it because it will save them millions in bandwidth, but for 99.99999% of other websites, it makes no sense. Also, another reason for React was to devalue front-end developers and make them easier to replace. Hey, Alex Jones, you want to put on another tinfoil hat? It's not about the rendering. It's about making sure all the state of the UI is consistent. That when text box A is changed, all the places in the page that depend on that value are updated. You can do it without React, but it's a real pain. Apparently, Facebook can't do it with React either. They still experience the same state inconsistency bug as described during React announcement as rationale for using React. What?
Where we had our most...
Hang on, let me just pop this open. Make sure the volume levels are okay. I think it's all right. Let me just pop this open. Let's see what this is. Is Facebook not able to solve their own problems with their own tools that they said they built to solve their own problems?
Where we had our most annoying chat bug happen over and over. Users would get an unseen count, and there would be no unseen messages behind it. You know, everyone's sort of used to seeing one of these numbers, clicking on it, and you get something new behind it. That's exciting, but when they get that number and they click, there's nothing there, they refresh the page and it's gone, that's really annoying. It's really frustrating. And that's what led to the whole fixed chat user feedback. And it wasn't like we didn't fix the problem. We would always fix some particular edge case, but this problem would keep coming back just because the whole system was fragile.
Nani?
And that was a good sign that something was fundamentally wrong here.
So
how can Flux help with something like this? If we're looking at the structure of the code that we had before, we have sort of the fundamental pieces. We have chat tab main messages, an unseen counter, and then we have an external handler that goes in and changes some of their state. They each have their own state, but the handler goes and modifies them. Right? All of the logic to modify state based on a new message coming in is in the handler itself. And so those three different pieces no longer have the ability to maintain internal consistency. They basically don't have that information. They've already ceded that control to the handler.
Wait, aren't you the guys that made React in order to solve exactly this kind of problem? And you're like, hey, we still have this problem. And what React version are we on now? Oh yeah, 19. Okay. And then they're going back and forth on some details around this whole thing. There's also an entire generation of management gatekeepers that only approve of React stacks because the population of React devs is so huge they step over one another for a job. I have a moderately complex web application, lots of heavy compute in the back end, in which I wrote a perfectly fine browser-based vanilla JavaScript UI that is performant and does everything the application needs. However, ordinary users see it and say it looks so old, like early web, and they literally don't want to be seen using such old-looking software. Their reason for rejection is a fashion argument. They think it makes them look old using it. Okay, so I go looking for a front-end developer to make my vanilla JS look more modern, and I can't afford anybody except third-world React developers who work amazingly fast and build my UI as fast as I can tell them what I need. The front-end code is now 2 to 3 times larger than the back-end. The UI looks like just all the other single-page applications, and my new beta users are finally treating the project like this is viable new software and not some Franken monster of old and new. I actually receive useful feedback now rather than complaints that it looks so old. Couldn't you just hire a designer that would have made your app look better with just CSS? One would think, but they cost 2 to 5 times what I found just having it all redone in React. HTML, CSS, JS, and React are the worst solutions for graphical user interfaces except for all the others, though. Maybe immediate mode GUIs. React is bloated, slow, and overcomplicated nowadays, but unfortunately the only sane way to work with retained mode UIs. In my experience, working without React devolves to re-implementing React ad hoc. Also, there are many UI challenges solved easily by React plugins. Multi-select boxes, date pickers, color pickers, file uploads, etc. Yes, this is using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but I don't have a nutcracker, and I do already have a sledgehammer, so why not? You've gotta be fucking kidding me. What would the nutcracker be in this analogy? Good question. I suppose an existing plugin that meets the requirements or the skills to build one myself. Um, it might be time for me to go live on a farm. I, I think I have to go like work with wood. I have to like go cut some wood and go live in a farm. I just can't. Hey, Patroclus, good to see you. I think the author misses one of the main advantages of React. Transformation of application state into UI is a pure function. I've worked with a lot of different UI frameworks, mostly in game dev before switching to web dev, and I've run into a million issues that occurred because of procedural approach to UI. I think the main take is, it's okay to do stuff in JavaScript, but first we should have fixed JavaScript stupid stuff. Packages like isEven, isOdd, when created by one guy trying to solve JavaScript, a weird way to do stuff, and now we're widespread without considering all the effort could be used in a better way. This is kind of a weird way to say it, but you get the point. What? The modulo operator always existed in JavaScript. IsEven and isOdd have always been stupid and unneeded. N modulo 2 equals 0, and N modulo 2 not equal 0 have never needed to be a dependency. Code is unclear. No one knows that % operator. Service companies which require you to produce code of offshoreable quality, as if someone without the skill to understand % can have the skills to understand how to translate your business needs into code. Nowadays, it's common for developers to learn React before they even learn JavaScript, and that's not great, but it's not the cause of the problem. It's the companies that pile onto a stack because it's easy to hire for. If everyone optimizes for hiring, we end up with a local maxima. React, we can't do better because no one else is doing better. And they talk about the medium, .NET MVC, get out of here with Blazor. Yeah, React examples. Although I don't agree with all the points, I have to say the amount of times a year I'm told, with a straight face, the following 4 lists with under 200 items in them is getting ridiculous. The truth is that it's simply unacceptable that in 2024 people are still trying to convince us that something as simple as a list could be slow in any reasonable scenario. Yeah, somewhere under the hood is a document get element by ID. It's no magic, and so the I don't know, he just says a whole lot of nothing here. I remember that. Hacker News, yeah. Turn JavaScript off by default, yep. Lectures on JavaScript and optimizations, yeah. Could have gone down the curl path, sure. The person writing this must have little to no experience developing UIs in classic frameworks. React has warts, but it is a decent implementation of reactive UI given the constraints of the web platform. Which constraints? Of course, you can achieve a speed up doing better than what React does with less context, updating only exactly the parts of the DOM that need to be updated. You will pay the price in terms of code complexity. As for async behavior, this is not something you can avoid, but cannot block on network requests or block until the user clicks somewhere. React does not push you towards async any more than the platform does. Yeah, React has flaws. Personally, I love web components and lit. Yeah, you can do all these things, but I still want to use React. Why React? Isn't it more complex? Yeah, but it has outstanding tooling, documentation, support, and a vast ecosystem. Almost everyone knows React, even if they don't like it. Despite my personal dislike, it's one of my go-to frameworks for new projects because of these reasons. If everyone jumps off the bridge, I'm going to jump off the bridge too. Why? Because everyone's jumping off the bridge. While there are performance issues, there are many experienced developers who can address them and yet don't. There are also a lot of very smart people working on various solutions, and yet where are they? At React 19. In summary, you can argue for any framework, but please don't believe that nobody knows what they're doing. That's not the statement that's being made. You completely missed it, and you're making massive generalizations. You're impugning generalizations on someone that were not being made. It's important to make a pragmatic approach. Pragmatism can come in all kinds of forms, and pragmatism of everyone else is doing it, therefore I is not pragmatism. That's cult-like follower sheep behavior. Also, no, front-end developers were not thinking that React were rendering on the server all this time, and they also didn't think that static HTML would be slower or anything. Yes, many of them did. Absolutely, they did. You can just go look up just about any one of Theo T3's videos on anything doing with React, and he said that many times. So did many others. That said, I believe we'll see a new approach, framework, or technology that will pass React in the near future. Can't wait. While I appreciate the pragmatic organic growth and improvement, many feel that a restart is becoming necessary. Cool, yeah, about style sheets, angry man yelling at cloud, Blazor, yeah, blah 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 blah. More about Medium. Um, there we go. That's it.